you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be at your event, even though it is online. I really wished I could be there in person, but it's a great pleasure to be there. Thank you for the kind invitation. What I would like to do in the next half an hour or so is I would like to share with you some updates on the CWTS Leiden ranking, and in particular also on the so-called transition to open research information. So I'm going to make the connection between the development of the Leiden ranking, a ranking that my Center for Science and Technology Studies, has been producing now for almost 20 years. And I'm going to connect this to the transition to open research information that we are now making. I will actually start by giving you some further information on that transition. I will say a few things about the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information. And then I will move to the topic of university rankings. I will say a few things about culture change around university rankings, in particular developments here in my country, in the Netherlands. And I will also then go in more detail in the Leiden ranking open edition. So let me start with the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information. The Barcelona Declaration is an initiative that was publicly launched last year in April 2024. So just 1.5 years ago. The declaration is an initiative that results from a workshop that took place in Barcelona, in Spain, in November 2023. So at that time, in November 2023, something really important happened. There were 25 experts in the broad area of research information. And these experts got together in Barcelona in a room, and they spent a full day discussing the importance of openness of research information. And in that meeting in November 2023, the decision was made to launch the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information. And actually in that meeting, the declaration was also being drafted by the members of, or by the participants in that meeting, the 25 research information experts. So this was a really big development for my center. We were one of the initiators of this initiative. I was there myself, for instance, in that room. Some other colleagues from the Center for Science and Technology Studies were also there. It is a big development also because we are aiming with this declaration, we are aiming for a quite radical and ambitious transition in the way we work with information about what is happening in the research system, so research information, a transition to more open ways of working with research information. So let me just briefly explain to you what actually is in this declaration, in the Barcelona Declaration on Open Research Information. The Barcelona Declaration is a declaration that can be signed by organizations that perform research or that fund research or that evaluate research. And organizations that sign the declaration, they make 4 commitments. And I will now show you these commitments. So the first commitment is to make openness the default for the research information that we use and produce. So research information can be information about, for instance, research outputs. So information perhaps about articles that we publish in journals, or information about other types of narrative outputs like books, for instance, or preprints. It can also be information about other types of outputs like data sets or software, for instance. Research information can also be information about the actors in the research system. So information about researchers, information about research organizations. All that information, according to the Barcelona Declaration, for all that information, we should aim for openness to be the default. So by default, we want this information about what is happening in the research system, we want that information to be open. This, for instance, also includes information about research funding, about grants, research grants. The motto that we use is, like in all the open science developments, it is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So we recognize that while openness should be the default, there can also be special situations where openness is not desirable or not possible. This is the first commitment of the Barcelona Declaration, and you could say this is the main commitment. The other 3 commitments are supporting the first commitment. So the second commitment is to work with services and systems that support and enable open research information. So that is about the infrastructure that is needed for the transition to open research information. The third commitment is about supporting the sustainability of these infrastructures. And the fourth commitment is a commitment to joint action. It's a commitment to collective action to accelerate the transition to open research information. So it's the idea that individual organizations cannot easily make this transition. It's very challenging, but if we do it together, then suddenly it's much easier. And suddenly we are in a much better position to make the transition to openness of research information. Why is this important? Why do we want to make this transition to open research information? There are a number of reasons. One important reason has to do with the way in which research information is used in decision-making processes and also in evaluation processes. So what we see is that a lot of research information is used in all kinds of metrics and indicators to support the way in which we make decisions in the research system. For instance, in universities or in research funders, decisions perhaps about allocation of funding, decision about future strategies. These decisions often are, to a significant degree, informed by data or information about what is happening in the research system. And we believe very strongly that that information should be open and should be fully transparent. And this is important to make the best possible decisions. If you rely on black box information, so information that is closed, information from proprietary data sources, then often you have very little freedom in how you use the information. So for instance, you can make use of predefined metrics, and you can try to use these metrics to make decisions. But if you want to know more what is behind these metrics, if you want to have a deeper understanding of what you can really conclude from these metrics, then often it is difficult. It is difficult when you work with closed information, with proprietary sources. In many cases, you cannot see what is behind the numbers. If you want to have an alternative type of metric, an alternative type of indicator, different from what a particular data source provides by default, then that is also often very difficult in the case of proprietary closed data sources. So these are some of the reasons why it is so important to make the transition to open research information. This is also at the same time, of course, part of the broader transition to open science. The broader open science transition, that is a big thing in my country, here in the Netherlands, more broadly in Europe, but of course also globally, with, for instance, the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation. So the open research information transition is one piece of the bigger puzzle of how to make the transition to open science. We have at the moment over 120 organizations globally that have signed the Barcelona Declaration. So these organizations have formally signed up to this initiative. They have made the 4 commitments that I have shown on the previous slide. So they are now working on implementing these commitments. These are organizations in more than 30 countries. Many of them are in Europe, but we also have signatories in North America, in Latin America, in Africa, not yet in Asia, although we are working on that. So I'm expecting to get the first signatories in Asia in the coming months. And I hope that we can also welcome signatories from your country, from South Korea. That would be really great. We would be very interested to also engage further with organizations in your country. You're very welcome to also join the open research information transition. So that's an invitation I just would like to make. In concrete terms, what does this all mean? In concrete terms, there is working groups in the Barcelona Declaration. At the moment, we have 7 working groups. You can see them here on this slide. And these 7 working groups, they are working on the implementation of the commitments that I've shown on an earlier slide, the 4 Barcelona Declaration commitments. One key commitment is joint action, so working together to make the transition. And this thing, working together, is actually happening in these 7 working groups. So in these working groups, we have representatives from organizations globally that have signed the Barcelona Declaration, or some of them are in the process of signing the declaration. And these organizations They have representatives in many of these working groups, and that's how we are now working on the implementation of the ambitions that the Barcelona Declaration presents. Some organizations are really at the forefront of these developments. They are perhaps ahead of many others. So one example is Sorbonne University in France. They have, for instance, decided to unsubscribe from a proprietary database, the Web of Science database. This is a database, as you may know, that provides information about research outputs, in particular research articles. The database is quite popular, but it also has the problem of being proprietary and being closed. So that means that when you want to use this data to support decision making, the possibilities that you have to really benefit from the data are actually quite limited. You can use the data in ways that are predefined by the tools that the database provides. But if you want to have full freedom in making use of the data and in, for instance, producing your own indicators, your own metrics based on the data, that is very difficult with such a closed database. And for that reason, the Sorbonne University has decided to unsubscribe from this database. A similar decision was also made in the Netherlands by Utrecht University. And at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, so my own center at Leiden University, we are also working on this open research information transition. So we are going to discontinue the use of traditional proprietary closed data sources, and we are moving to open alternatives. So for instance, one open alternative that you may know about is the OpenAlex database. That is also what we use for the Leiden ranking, open edition. It's not the only alternative, there are many more, but at the moment we are in the process of making that transition. And I expect that in the coming years we will complete this transition. So we will fully move from proprietary to open research information. Okay, this was in a nutshell the developments around the Barcelona Declaration on open research information. There's much more that can be said about this, but I would like now to actually connect this discussion about open research information to discussions about university rankings, because that shows in very concrete terms what the transition to open research information actually entails. So I'm first going to tell you a few things about discussions in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, I'm chair of a national working group that is leading the culture change around university rankings. So this is an official working group of the umbrella organization of the Dutch universities. It is called Universities of the Netherlands. And in this working group, the universities are working together to change the way in which they deal with university rankings. So I should tell you a little bit about the history for all of this. So in the Netherlands, we are moving to new ways of doing research assessment at the level of organizations, but also at the level of individual researchers or individual academics. And this is in the Netherlands, this is called the National Recognition and Rewards Initiative. It's a big thing in the Netherlands. In all the universities, we are changing the way in which we think, for instance, about hiring and promotion criteria, about career policies, about criteria for professor appointments. So in the past, there was a strong focus on, for instance, publication output, and we are now moving away from that because we feel that is an old-fashioned way of thinking about what it means to be a strong academic. We need to think much more broadly about the many different contributions that academics make, and that is called the Recognition and Rewards Program in the Netherlands. And one element of that program is culture change around university rankings, because university rankings, from our point of view, are too much based on an old-fashioned traditional way of thinking about what it means to perform well in the research system. So a way of thinking that is very much focused on a limited set of parameters, in particular, again, publication output. So this is a report that you see here on the slide, a report that was published 2 years ago in the Netherlands. It was written by an expert group. I was one of the members of this expert group. And in this report, we make a proposal for culture change around university rankings. And that proposal has been adopted by the universities, by the rectors of the Dutch universities, and we are now working on the implementation. And what you see at the right here is the actual plan for the culture change. So you see that we have actions at the institutional level, actions at the national level, and then the most ambitious actions at the international or European level. And some of these actions relate to the use of rankings or league tables. Others are about communication, about collaboration, and also about alternatives to traditional league tables. And right now we are in the middle of the process of implementing this agenda for change. It's happening at the moment as we speak. It's quite ambitious. I believe the Netherlands is one of the countries globally that's at the forefront of these developments. We are very interested to actually join forces with other countries in Europe, but also globally, that are having similar discussions and that also would like to move away from the traditional university rankings. So we believe in the Netherlands that the rankings are excessively focused on a narrow set of parameters, publication output, reputation, these types of things. We think there are lots of methodological problems in these rankings. We also believe that it is not always possible for the university to just discontinue their participation in the ranking. Universities also sometimes depend quite strongly on the rankings. So this creates a dilemma, and that means that you should proceed cautiously in this area. It is not always possible to just say, as a university, we will now stop participating in the rankings, but there are other actions that you can take to deal with the rankings in more responsible ways and in ways that are more aligned with a modern vision on the role of universities in the research system, in society, and also a modern vision on what we expect from individual academics and also from research units and research institutions. And that is what we are working on in the Netherlands. And in the longer term, and depending also on the extent to which there is global or at least European alignment, in the longer term, more and more universities might potentially actually decide to discontinue their participation in certain rankings. We see that already happening in some European countries. So what you see here is a number of screenshots that I took from different university web pages. So you see in the top left, the University of Zurich in Switzerland. This university has decided to withdraw from the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. So it is no longer delivering data to that ranking. And what you see in the bottom left is a similar thing for Sorbonne University. So Sorbonne University recently announced a similar decision. They are also withdrawing from the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. At the bottom right, you see Utrecht University in the Netherlands. They also made such a decision. And then in the top right, you see a university in France, the Université de Lorraine. And this university is also a Barcelona Declaration signatory. And they also made that decision. They said, actually, a ranking that is based on non-transparent black box indicators based on closed research information, that is not a ranking that we feel comfortable with. We don't want to participate in such a ranking, and we will no longer provide data to these rankings. So we will accept that we will no longer be included in that ranking. So these 4 universities, one in the Netherlands, one in Switzerland, and 2 in France, they all made that decision to withdraw from the Times Higher Education World University Rankings, sometimes also other rankings. And I expect that in the coming years, there might be more European universities that are going to make similar decisions. Here you see the explanation that was offered by the rector of Utrecht University. So the rector of Utrecht University said that the Times Higher Education ranking is too much focused on competition rather than cooperation. So the rector made the argument that we need to be focused much more on collaboration, also between institutions, rather than being excessively in a competitive mindset. Also, a connection was made to, again, open science. So it was emphasized that if we want to adopt open science practices, we need to make that shift towards more collaboration instead of competition. What is interesting to mention, by the way, is that these 4 universities, they were all ranked in quite prominent places in the ranking, in the Times Higher Education ranking, but they all decided to give up that prominent ranking to kind of stick to their principles related to transparency and openness. This is the bigger landscape. These are developments taking place in Europe and taking place in the Netherlands. I do want to say there's much more going on. Also outside Europe, there are universities that, for instance, have withdrawn from rankings, or universities that are positioning themselves quite critically towards the rankings. So this is not just a European development, but I wanted to highlight some of the recent ongoing things happening in Europe. I'm now going to tell you a bit more about the work that we do at my center, at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, and in particular our work on the Leiden ranking open edition. So I said a number of things now that are about rankings and about actually the problematic nature of many rankings, in particular the big commercial non-transparent rankings like Times Higher Education. I do want to clarify that at CWTS, we are not opposed against rankings in general. So what we are opposed against is rankings that are non-transparent, rankings for which it is unclear how they have been produced. It's unclear whether you can really kind of trust the data. And also rankings that make strong claims about the information they provide, claims that are actually not justified based on the information they work with. So, for instance, rankings that claim that they tell you which university is the best in the world, which we believe is a very problematic claim because university performance has many different dimensions, and you cannot just say this university is the best in the world. It depends on what you're interested in. Are you interested more in research, more in teaching? Are you interested more in societal engagement, for instance? So you have all these different dimensions of university performance, and taking them all together and creating a one-dimensional non-transparent ranking, that's deeply problematic. We produce at CWTS our own ranking, the Leiden ranking. And in the Leiden ranking, we try to do things in a much better, much more responsible way. So we don't have all these strong claims about which university is the best in the world. We don't think that's something you can make statements about. So we try to be more modest. And also we are much more transparent with our open edition of the Leiden ranking. So in this blog post that I published together with my colleague Nathan van Eck that I published last year, we make that argument for opening the black box of university rankings. We criticize the commercial rankings that are not open, not transparent. And we also then explain what we do at CWTS and how we produce rankings in a transparent, fully reproducible way by making use of open research information. So by building on the commitment to open research information that we have made ourselves, for instance, with the Barcelona Declaration on open research information. The Leiden Ranking Open Edition was launched in 2024. January 2024 is based fully on data from the Open Alex database. So in the past, we used a proprietary Web of Science database, but in the Open Edition, we have replaced that by Open Alex as an open alternative. With the website, it's the website of the Leiden Ranking Open Edition. Nowadays, we include almost 3,000 universities worldwide. So we have many universities. Actually, with the Open Edition, we have many more universities than in the so-called traditional edition that is based on Web of Science data. We produce all these statistics. It is all bibliometric statistics. So it's based on publications. And this is not because we believe that publications is the only thing that matters in the research system. No, we actually believe that publications provide only a very partial and incomplete picture of research performance. But it is one element, one relevant, one significant element of the performance of universities. And this is the element that we are highlighting in the Leiden ranking and in the Leiden ranking open edition. But we really emphasize that this does not give you the full picture of the performance of universities, not even the full picture of the research performance, but it's one particular perspective on what universities are doing. So here you see a Korean university, and you can see, for instance, for this university, the number of publications they published in a particular time period, but also the number of publications that were highly cited, being in the top 1% or the top 10% most highly cited of their field. And all of this is based on open data from this Open Alex database. And that, for instance, also means that when you look at the individual statistics, we see that this university has 119 publications that are in the top 1% most highly cited of the world in the period 2020-2023. And normally, when you work with proprietary databases, with black box indicators, you can see these numbers, but you cannot really, you don't really have much information about what's behind these numbers. With the Open Research Information Transition and with the Open Alex database, we are actually able to display the underlying information, to give users access to the information behind these numbers. And that means that we can actually show which articles are highly cited. So what are the 119 articles from this university that are highly cited? And here you see, for instance, some of these articles. So when you click on this number, 119, you get a list of all the articles. You can see when they were published, where they were published. You can see the authors. You can see the number of citations they have. So in this way, you can have a much deeper understanding of what it means to have these highly cited publications and which, for instance, which university departments or which individual researchers contributed to these publications. And this, we mean, this level of transparency is crucial, we believe, for making good use of all kinds of research analytics and making sure that we use these analytics in a way that leads to the right types of decision making. Our commitment to openness and transparency is a really strong one, so that also means that all the data underlying the Leiden Ranking Open Edition is openly available. It's made available under so-called CC0, public domain dedication. So that means that anyone can reuse the data without any restrictions, any limitations. So anyone is, for instance, very welcome to produce their own alternative type of ranking based on the data. If you feel that is of interest, you can just take the data underlying the Leiden ranking and use it for your own purposes. What we see here on this slide is a comparison between the Leiden ranking open edition and the traditional Leiden ranking. So we see the percentage of highly cited publications of universities globally. And what you see is that actually the differences are quite small. So for most universities, it doesn't make a big difference whether you look at the traditional Web of Science-based Leiden ranking or the new ranking based on Open Alex. So that is important. That shows that we can make this open research information transition and that we still get statistics, bibliometric statistics that are comparable to what we are used to from more traditional ways of working with, for instance, a database like Web of Science. We also made one more step this year in the Leiden Ranking Open Edition. We not only made things more transparent, but we also made things more inclusive. So we have started to include a broader set of publications that in the past we did not include, but that now we do cover, thanks also to the broad coverage of publications in the Open Alex database. So 10 years ago at Kisti-Cwts, we published the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics, and one of the principles in that manifesto is to protect excellence in locally relevant research. So what we were saying is, if all the research is supposed to be in English, is supposed to be published in international journals, then certain research topics are going to be excluded from consideration by the research community. Topics that are more of local relevance, topics that, for instance, don't really fit into English, don't fit in English language international journals. These are the topics that researchers will then no longer pay attention to. So we need to actually protect excellence in locally relevant research. We need to acknowledge the importance of research topics that have a more regional or national focus, research topics for which perhaps it doesn't make sense to publish in English, but publishing in the local language makes more sense. And that argument was made 10 years ago in the Leiden Manifesto. More recently, it is, for instance, highlighted in the Helsinki Initiative on Multilingualism in Scholarly Communication. And in the Leiden ranking, we have now also adapted our way of working to align with this emphasis on more inclusivity in the way we look at publications. So this year, we released the Leiden Ranking Open Edition 2025. And what we have now done is we have also included publications that we refer to as non-core publications. And these are publications that provide a more inclusive view on what is happening in the research system globally, and in particular that give more prominence to research outputs with a local focus, a national or a regional focus, outputs that might be published in scientific venues that are more oriented towards, for instance, a national audience, venues that perhaps don't publish in English but publish in the local language. So we believe strongly at CWTS that it is problematic to make a value judgment where we say things that are published in English, things that are published in international journals, prominent international journals, are of more value than research outputs published in a national language. Research outputs focus more on national audiences. This is problematic. Actually, these are different types of outputs that serve different purposes. And we feel that one should stay away from making a value judgment about what is more important or more valuable. So outputs focused on international audiences and outputs focused on national or regional audiences, they all serve their own purpose and they're all valuable in their own right. This is an example for a Brazilian University of Sao Paulo. Here you also see the effect of being inclusive. So what you see here is statistics for this university, and we have now included not only so-called core publications, but also non-core publications. And that means publications outside international English language journals. And then what you see here at the bottom of this slide, you see that almost 1/3 of the publications of this university are non-core publications. So these are publications that you typically don't see when you use, for instance, a database like Web of Science, which is a selective database, a database that focuses on publications in international scientific journals. But in the Leiden ranking open edition based on Open ALEX, we make these publications visible, these non-core publications, about 1/3 of the publication output of this university. And we also see, for instance, that this gives more diversity in terms of language. So what you can see is that about 1/5 of the publications of this university are in Portuguese, not in English. So that shows how we can give a more comprehensive and a more inclusive perspective on what the university is doing. And for some universities, like in Latin America, this makes quite a big difference. Although that also depends on what is included and what is not included at the moment in the Open ALEX database. Okay, there is much more that can be said about all these topics: openness, inclusiveness, university rankings, the need for culture change, the connections to broader agendas around research assessment reform. What I did in my presentation is I just showed some highlights, some of the bigger developments. If you have further questions, if you would like to know more about that, I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your attention.
네, 루도 알트만 소장님의 발표였는데요. 참고로 소장님께서는 오후 5시에 이어지는 회의 일정으로 Q&A 세션에 함께 하시지는 못할 것 같습니다. 그 점 양해를 부탁드리겠고요. 따라서 그 소장님이 방금 말씀하신 것처럼 질문이 있으시면 소장님께 드릴 질문을 지금 먼저 화상으로 한번 받겠습니다. 저희가 질문이 있으신 분 손을 들어주시면 화상으로 그 질문이 진행될 수 있도록 도와드리겠습니다. 질문 있으십니까? 네, 여기 마이크 좀 갖다 주십시오.
Good morning, Ludo. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Dong-gyu from Kisti, and I have a question related to culture and the usage of Leiden ranking. So, as you pointed out during the presentation, that there are some misalignment between the purpose of Leiden ranking and the actual usage of Leiden ranking. So, especially in Korea, people tend to focus on the number of publication, or at the best, they focus on a PP 10% index. So I think that the indexes themselves are innocent, but do you have any plan or idea to nudge or induce people to focus on the other indexes like collaboration or gender?
Thank you for that question. We are indeed, we hope that users of ranking tools and analytics tools more in general, that indeed they will consider many more dimensions than just publication output. In the Leiden ranking, we kind of have built all our analytics around publications, and not just citation statistics, but for instance, also, as you mentioned, collaboration statistics. But actually, I would argue that this is still quite narrow. This is only publications. So I would actually want to make the case for considering all kinds of other types of analytics beyond bibliometric statistics, whenever that is relevant in decision-making processes. So universities and other actors in the research system should ask themselves the question, what do I really care about? What do I feel is important? What do I expect from research? Is that indeed mainly publications that perhaps contribute to cutting-edge research, or is that more societal contributions that help to, for instance, address all kinds of societal challenges? Or is that more kind of research that kind of informs also teaching? So you can have all kinds of different ideas about what should be prioritized in research. And depending on what kind of ideas you have, the statistics that the Leiden ranking provide may be more or less important. And other statistics provided through other types of tools might be of more significance. So I would always advise people to consider the Leiden ranking only to the extent that it is helpful in answering the specific questions that an organization has.
답변되셨을까요? 저희 시간 관계상 한 분의 질문만 받았고요. 소장님은 여기서 보내드려야 할 것 같습니다. 여러분 다시 한번 소장님께 긴 시간 수고해 주신 소장님께 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 소장님 감사합니다. 네.
It was a pleasure to be at your event. Thank you.